All right, everyone. Thank you for participating in this presentation. I'd love the opportunity to walk you through Omai because, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think this is probably one of the best gold projects in Latin America, and it's one that's really not well understood or well, well understood. I guess is probably the best way. And my goal here is to make sure that you understand by the end of this project why this is going to be one of the most successful gold projects in Latin America. The typical forward-looking statement, just take your time to read it somewhere in the future. You've been through a lot of mining presentations, I'm sure, but I may be saying some things that are forward-looking, and please understand that there's always risks associated with that. So Omai, I think, is probably one of the best and unique opportunities in Latin America, and there's lots of reasons for that. Number one, it's a proven deposit. It was mined by Cambior and IAMGold in the 90s and the early part of 2000, and it was shut down when gold was at $350 an ounce, but it did mine almost 3.8 million ounces at 1.6 grams. So very high grade, very large, but really the opportunity for all of us now is to try and understand what was left behind. And there's tremendous evidence here that a lot of gold was left behind at these two pits that were mined, and I'll walk you through that. But just as importantly, there's quite a bit of evidence that there's a number of new targets in and around the initial discoveries that have never been tested, which I think is extraordinarily exciting. What's important here, because we are in Guyana, there is infrastructure here. We do have an airstrip. We do have some buildings to house our employees and for the core shed. We do have 100% interest, and we actually acquired this prospecting license directly from the Guyanese government, which I think is quite important as well. So we are working directly with the Guyanese government to advance this project. And then in terms of the environment, because I always get asked this question because there was a former producing mine, what's the environmental liability here? There is none. The Guyanese government gave us full indemnity, and the reason why they were willing to do that, of course, is because there is no environmental liability there. IAMGold did a great job reclaiming the site, which I'll walk you through shortly. In terms of the Guiana Shield, when you look on the African side, I'm sure many of you have heard Mark Bristow mention that the Guiana Shield is where their exploration is going to focus on. And on the African side, you got a huge amount of world-class assets. On the Latin American side, there are some great world-class assets like Rosabel and Marion. Omai, I think, will have the chance to demonstrate that it also will be a world-class asset. But really, the exploration on the Latin American side is a fraction of what's occurred on the African side. And I think that, at the end, is the real opportunity here. Because of the amount of cover on the Latin American side, a lot more rainfall than you would see on the African side. So there's more cover here, so it's not as easy in terms of exploration and finding deposits. But just like the geology on the African side, the geology is the same on the Latin American side. And that, as I said, is the real opportunity here, is to try and find these world-class assets on the Guiana Shield on the Latin American side. I think this is going to be the new frontier for exploration, whether it's in Guyana or Suriname, eventually maybe Venezuela one day in the future. But this is really where the exploration is going to focus on in the future, I believe. This is what Omai looked like when it was in operation by IAMGold and Cambior. All this has now been fully reclaimed, but you can see the two pits that were mined, Wenot and Fennell. And again, as I go through this, you'll understand why a lot of gold was left behind on those two pits. So everything has been removed here other than a couple of buildings, which we now converted to sleeping quarters and a core shed. Even the mill was removed here. And this, I think, is the most important slide in our whole presentation. And you could really start to understand the limited amount of drilling that occurred at Omai. Rosabel had almost 800,000 meters of drilling. The Marion mine, which is producing 500,000 ounces of gold a year with Newmont and the Suriname government in partnership, had 500,000 meters of drilling. Omai has less than 90,000 meters of drilling. And the reason for that is when IAMGold had this asset, and again, gold was at $350 an ounce. Not a lot of money was spent on exploration. However, there was ore to the west of the Wenot pit, and the mill had to be moved in order to access that ore. And IAMGold made the decision, probably the right decision at the time, to move the mill to Rosabel. And as we all know, Rosabel is 16 million ounces mined in current reserves. So they made the right decision in terms of moving it to Rosabelle so they can put that asset in production quicker. But at the end of the day, because of that decision, a lot of gold was left at Omai, and that's our job now to demonstrate and to find that gold for our investors. This is Google Maps of the area, and three key areas here that I really want to highlight is the Wenot pit, which again was mined to about, say, 190-meter depth, but it's wide open on strike, and you can see all the green dots with mineralization. So we're pretty excited that we think Wenot is going to be open on strike, but it's also open to depth, which I'll show you as well. So I think there's a real opportunity here for not only expanding the pit to depth and also to the south, which I'll explain shortly, but also on strike. At the Fennell Pit, a couple things to really point out there. Again, it was mined about 1.6 grams. They hit a non-mineralized dike and they stopped mining from an open pit. But quite a few drill holes were drilled below that non-mineralized dike, and some high-grade intercepts have been intercepted there. But just as importantly, when you go east of Fennell, you'll see an area there called Broccoli Hill, and you can sort of see that line of green dots where IAMGold and Cambior tried to find the extension of Fennell, but it wasn't there. And the reason is Broccoli Hill, which we think is a high-priority target, they needed to continue going further east because it's a new structure. So it wasn't an extension of Fennell, but a new target. And that's one of our high priority exploration targets, which I'll walk through shortly as well. The geophysics. So this is all brand new geophysics. And what's really important for us now that we start to understand this, we have access to the old core. And we're now reinterpreting this area because at the time when this was mined, Rosabelle was still a fairly new discovery. Marion wasn't discovered. And people really didn't understand mineralization in the sediments. But now that we start to understand more and more about the Guiana Shield on the Latin American side, the Wenot pit is a magnetic high and the Fennell pit is magnetic low, even though they come from the same intrusive source, but both they have different host rocks. But going through the geophysics, we now have identified a number of high priority targets in and around the existing discoveries of Fennell and Wenot. You know, whether they all work out or just a few work out, the key here is once the market starts to understand from our drilling program that not only is the existing deposits open, but there's potential for blue sky here. I think really this is going to be the premier gold company in Latin America. And you can see the 3D inversion. And this one's really important because I really want to highlight just east of Fennell that you can sort of see there, that blue inversion, the magnetic low. That looks like, from the geophysics, very similar to Fennell. So for us, that's a high priority target. And I'll show you a slide a little bit later, but it's not only the geophysics that indicate it's a high priority target. It's also the work near surface, the soils, as well as some of the auger drilling that's been done that indicates to us that this is a high priority target for us. This is the drilling that's occurred, basically the 90,000 meters of drilling that's occurred at Fennell and Wenot. And a couple of things here really that stands out. You can sort of see that area at Fennell, which is to the right, where you know, there was some shallow drilling and then you got the deep drilling. And really what the reason for that is the non-mineralized dike, but they did drill 46 holes below that dike. And we think there's significant potential to have a sizable resource below Fennell. And then at Wenot, what really stands out is all the shallow drilling, and the geology indicates that the mineralization didn't stop because they decided to stop mining at 190 meter depth. We think the ore body continues to depth as well as on strike. And there's also indication of potential mineralization in between Fennell and Wenot, as well as, I'll show you in a moment, indication that there's mineralization to the south of Wenot, which is really important when you're looking at mining scenarios down the road. And this is the Wenot pit, and you can sort of see the shear zone. You can see the mill in the distance there, which has now been reclaimed and moved. But the reason why they had to stop mining is because the mill was there, and to continue to the west, they had to move it. And the decision was to move the mill to Rosabelle. And as I said, I think it was the right decision at the time because they really didn't have any additional resources here other than what was sitting at the mill. And the internal report is around 300,000 ounces sitting below the mill site. But really, we think it's not just the ore and the gold sitting below the mill site. We think it's really what's continues to go to the west and what's available to depth. And just as importantly, you can sort of see there in the mineralized sedimentary rocks, they didn't really mine the sediments, and they didn't drill at depth in the sediments. And today we now know that a lot of the host mineralization at Rosabelle and Marion are in the sediments. But this was an area that wasn't really explored or well understood back in the 90s and early 2000s. So this is significant upside for us when we're looking to explore Wenot. And you can see here some of the historical drill holes that were completed by IAMGold and the other operators. And you can see ore grade hits to the east and to the west at Wenot. But as I mentioned, what's below the Wenot pit is just as important as what's available on strike. And the image to the below, you can see those yellow lines. And the reason why that is important, there was a prior operator that had this asset in the early part of, let's say, 2010, 2014. They drilled some holes, but fortunately for us, they decided, because they ran out of cash, not to assay them. And we were able to recover that core. And some of the news releases you've been seeing coming out is really assaying that core. And what we've been able to identify is significant ore grade hits below the Wenot pit. So we're pretty excited here that Wenot has real potential to increase in size. And that's really where our first drill program is going to focus on, is the low-hanging fruit to build a resource at Wenot and demonstrate to the market that there is quite a bit of gold here. And you can see some of the core that was recovered from GGMC. So we were lucky enough that actually one of our employees, when IAMGold shut down, she organized for the core to be sent to GGMC, and this would have been by the prior operator as well. So we're able to recover all that core. We don't have it all, so unfortunately, some of the holes that we reported, we didn't have all the core. But regardless of what we reported, we think is demonstrating that there is quite a bit of gold below the Wenot pit here. And you can see here two of the holes that we assayed. There's the Wenot pit. There is water in the pit. It's not acid generating, it's clean water. We think once we're ready, depending on what kind of decision we make of whether to mine this as a continuation open pit or underground, we think that water can just be released into the river, maybe with some sort of lime filter, and get that water emptied out of the pit if we decide to proceed by open pit. And you can see here, this is what we released in our first set of results. Below the Wenot pit in the shear zone, we got wide zones of good mineralization, 20 meters of 3.5 grams, 10 meters of almost 4 grams. And just as important, we got sniffs that the mineralization is open in the sediments. And as I mentioned, it wasn't really explored in the sediments here for mineralization. And I think this is the real opportunity at Wenot, because not only if it extends to depth, but you could also extend it into the sediments to depth. Then at that point in time, you could also widen the pit. So not only are you going to get more gold, but you're going to eventually start to decrease the overall strip ratio here if a decision is made to access this via pit versus underground access. And then we just released some additional results last week. And again, you can see in the sediments, and you can see these vertical structures. And when you got these kind of vertical structures,
looks like we're having a few technical difficulties here with Mario. Oh, there, you're back. Sorry, Mario. Yeah, I can see you and hear you now. It's like you froze there for a second.
All right, hopefully, okay. So I was indicating the structures continue to depth, and we drilled but we assayed a fantastic hole of 9 grams over 14 meters, which you can see there in the sediments. But what we want to highlight and what we try to highlight in that news release is some of the core sections are actually missing. So there's real opportunity here that some of the assays there are understated, because not only were some sections missing, but at times we had to cut quarter core because we only had half a core to sample. And sometimes, as you know, Unfortunately, some people send in the best part when it was half core. So, what we're seeing there below in the sediments, I think, is real opportunity to continue to increase and demonstrate now that there is some potential high grade and potential open pit in the sediments at Wenot. And as I mentioned, if we can have mineralization not only in the volcanics but in the sediments, we can deepen the pit and widen the pit, which I think makes the potential here significant. In addition to, of course, extending this on strike, and you can see the outline of the pit, the dotted line, how shallow the pit was. So if we can extend this on strike to depth, we think we can generate quite a bit of ounces at Wenot, and I think the market's going to start to pay attention at Wenot. So we're pretty excited with what we're starting to see at the Wenot pit. We also announced that drilling has commenced at Wenot. There's a nice little picture of the drill. We have one drill to date. We plan to drill 5,000 meters, and we're gonna take I'll call it the low-hanging fruit. I think it's prudent to do that because based on the drill program we think we have a chance to generate an inferred 43101 resource, the maiden 43101 resource for Wenot by year end. So we're gonna proceed with that plan, and then after that we'll drill Fennell and some of the additional targets. And you can see some of the drill holes that we're targeting at Wenot. Again, it's all going to be below the pit and a little bit on strike because some of the best grades that we saw in the prior image, the 9 grams over 14 meters, which were in the sediments, was also to the west of Wenot in the shallow part where it was mined quite shallow. So we think there's real potential here to generate a sizable resource at Wenot. So pay attention. There's going to be quite a bit of catalyst now coming forward as we start to release some drill holes here, and hopefully the market will pay real attention here because my experience is when you got brownfield type projects, the view is always, you had a world-class company like IAMGold shut down this asset. There can't be anything left. Why would they have left gold behind? And it takes time for the market to understand that, they did leave gold behind, and there's lots of reasons why they made a decision to shut it down. It was low gold price, as I mentioned. It was the new discovery at Rosabelle and the desire to get that in production as quickly as possible, and the lack of drilling at Omai. And that's really the biggest factor. There was just no money spent on exploration at Omai to build up the resource. And if you weren't making a lot of money at $350 an ounce, you're not going to spend $10, $20, $30 million looking for more gold that you're not going to make money. And I think that was the dilemma Cambria and IAMGold were faced in the late 90s and early part of 2000 with Omai. But again, from an investor perspective, that's the real opportunity here because as you saw from the Wenot slides, a lot of gold and high-grade gold was left behind by the prior operators. And this is Fennell. As I mentioned, the Fennell pit was mined to about 200 meters, and then they hit a non-mineralized dike. It was post-mineral dike, and it's about 100 to 150 meters thick. So they couldn't continue the pit. But, thankfully, they did decide at the bottom of the pit to drill some holes, and they did drill 46 holes. But what's really important is there were 41 intervals by 31 grams per ton or greater over a meter or greater, including multiple intervals of 1,000 to 3,000 gram hits. So we know there's some real high-grade intercepts and gold below the Fennell pit. And look, this is no different than what you would see in Canada in the Greenstone Belt, and there's no reason why this mineralization will not continue to depth. One of the deepest holes was 900 meters, so about 500 meters below the dike. So it's actually not very deep if you think about it from a mining perspective, because you could access that ore with a ramp from the bottom of the pit. And you could access easily 500 to 600 meters just by ramping down. So we're pretty excited what Fennell could present from a mining perspective, as well from an exploration perspective, because not only do you got extremely high grade intervals there, but you also got some real wide zones. Whether it's 100 meters or 35 grams within there would have been 1,000 gram hit. The 49 meters of 25 grams, but some of the better intercepts actually ended in mineralization. Again, and the reason for that is IAMGold made the decision to move the mill to Rosabelle, and this wasn't accessible by open pit, and they didn't want to access it by underground means, and they saw the value at Rosabelle. Again, I think it was probably the right decision at the time, but this is really our opportunity here at Omai Gold Mines. And here's another section. Again, it's pretty hard to see unless you look closely, but again, you can see some good grades, some good widths, and it's wide open. So we're excited to eventually drill Fennell. We started with Wenot because we got to drill some deeper holes at Fennell because we're not going to be able to do it from the bottom of the pit unless we decide to dewater it. So we felt Wenot would be the best first target, and then eventually we'll decide where we're going to drill at Fennell. And then you can sort of see to the east of Fennell in that little arrow, Broccoli Hill, and they did test just to the east of Fennell for more mineralization, and they didn't find any because there was none. But they didn't really understand or really look for additional deposits in and around the initial discoveries. And again, that's really the opportunity here for investors. You know, we have not only high-grade pits at Fennell and Wenot that continue to depth and on strike, but there is a number of targets here that have potential to have gold. And again, back then, you know, it wasn't well understood that these kind of deposits come in clusters. And we know these are all from the same intrusive source. They've done isotope testing. So we understand this is all coming from the same intrusive source. And if you look at Roosevelt, you look at Marion, it's not one big super pit of 16 million ounces. It's a number of bigger and smaller pits. But back then, when Omai was mined, it wasn't really understood that you can get a 500,000 ounce pit, a 250,000 ounce pit, a 2 million ounce pit. It just wasn't understood back then. But today we know that. And you know, as we continue to explore for more discoveries in and around initial discoveries here, I think, as I said, you know, this has real potential to be the premier gold company in Latin America. And Broccoli Hill, I'll highlight that one because, you know, that I think is one of our top exploration targets. If you look there, you got almost let's call it a 500 meter by 500 meter area of gold and soil anomaly, ore grade in auger drilling, old workings from the port knockers or alluvial miners, what you call them. Port knockers is what they're called in Guyana. So we know there's mineralization here from the work at surface. We see it in the geophysics. It looks identical from the geophysics to Fennell. So we think there's real potential here to have another discovery at Broccoli Hill. And we think later in the year, we'll start doing some work. We'll do some trenching here to start so we can identify some of the structures, see if we can open up some quartz veins, and then basically start drilling maybe later on in the year here, which I think, again, I'm going to keep saying it, you know, once the market understands that this is not just a Fennell and Wenot story, but this is a district story, I think this is going to capture the market's attention. And, you know, even to the south of Wenot, what's really interesting for us is one hole was drilled previously to the south of Wenot. We wouldn't have probably drilled that, but fortunately it was drilled, and there was some ore grade right near surface and some anomalous gold. And in our geophysics to the south of Wenot in the sediments, we actually see some geophysical anomalies there that we targeted even before we got those assays back. And one of them is actually in the tailings area, the dump area, not the tailings area. And, you know, as we move further to the south of Wenot, we see, again, some additional targets here in the sediments. And, you know, again, once you have 1, 2, 3 more discoveries in this area, this is going to capture not only the markets, but the majors' attention. In terms of catalysts, because everyone's always looking for catalysts, and you know what's the company's plans. We just launched our 5,000 meter drill program. You know, we should have that completed by, you know, but let's say no later than the end of May. And assays will be coming out over that period of time. After that, we plan to launch another drill program, which will then target Fennell, potentially Wenot, and some additional targets that I think. Again, the market's going to want to finance because, you know, after we drill Wenot, we'll be able to demonstrate that a lot of gold was left behind. And then the first, in terms of 43101 for this area, will be at Wenot, and we hope to have that done by the end of the year. You know, COVID pending, we think we can do it, but we don't anticipate any issues from COVID delaying our plans here. In terms of the management team, because this is quite important as well, Renaud Adams is our chairman, and Renaud coming on as chairman was really important because he operated Roosevelt for IAMGold and worked in Suriname. So he knows this region extraordinarily well, and having his expertise for the region as well as operating mines in this region, I think will come quite useful for us going forward. Dennis Clement was one of the first to, one of the founders of oil and gas company for offshore exploration in Guyana. Exxon has a major discovery there. So Dennis knows Guyana quite well. Nadine Miller, who sits on a number of boards, including West Dome, is an engineer, works for JDS, but also is an expert in tailings facilities. And Nadine's a great addition to our team. And Lon Shaver, who's head of corporate development at Silvercorp, is on our team as well. And he brings a lot of experience from the capital markets perspective, as well as, M&A and financings. And what's important there as well is Silvercorp owns about 15% of the company. So we actually have a real strong shareholder base to really advance this company going forward as we continue to explore in and around our prospecting licenses. And then in terms of the management team, at the end of the day, this is the team that really provides the value. At the end of the day, I'm the CEO. I'm really a spokesperson, help provide guidance. But without this team on this slide, I'm not sure we could ever be successful. And it's really led by Dennis Lapointe, who's our VP of Exploration. And do your research on Dennis. But many people view him as the expert in the Guiana Shield on the Latin American side. He actually discovered Marion for Alcoa, the old Alcoa aluminum company. And now being operated by Newmont. But Dennis knows this area, I think, better than anyone else. Linda Hesterman, who is also our geologist, she worked for Cambio and IAMGold. She was the exploration manager for IAMGold. And same with Mike Augustin, who's helping us out quite a bit as well. And both Linda and Michael confirmed to us that there was just no money in the budget to really explore here. And again, it was the times we were in, $200 to $350 per ounce gold is not a real exciting environment to spend $20, $30 million looking for more gold in an area where you're not making a lot of money. Perry Holloway, as well as come on as VP of Corporate Affairs and Social Responsibility. Perry was a former ambassador to Guyana for the United States, and I think Perry adds tremendous value for us in really understanding how to operate in the country. Not that we don't have experience, but having Perry help guide us in our decision making when it comes to operating Guyana is quite useful. And obviously, you got the rest of our management team here. So, in terms of the capital structure, the final slide I want to go through, we have about 200 million shares outstanding. So, based on today's share price, we're trading around $30 million market cap, which I think is ridiculous for what we have here in at Omai. We do have two very large shareholders, Silvercorp, which owns about 15% of the company, and Sandstorm, which owns about 10% of the company, and Goldspot also is a shareholder, which provides some technical services for us. So we have a very strong shareholder base here, and I think that's going to help propel us going forward as we continue to explore this area. That is Omai. Hopefully I didn't take too much of people's time here. And but I'm open now to questions.
You're right on time, Mario. 30 minutes there, right on the button. So yeah, there are quite a few questions.
Okay.
First question, is there currently any proven reserves here at Omai?
No. The reason is when it was shut down, IAMGold had some historical resources, which are not 43101 compliant. And the only one that they did a study on, internal study, was below the Fennell Pit. And they identified 1.5 million ounces at 3 grams or 2.5 million ounces at 4 grams, depending on whether you cap the grades or not. Also, you need some capping. But when they did that internal resource, they did as an open pit. So from our perspective, you're likely not going to mine Omai as an open pit. So that's really the opportunity here, because maybe we can get a much higher resource here. Maybe similar ounces, less ounces, I don't know, but I'm pretty confident we'll get a higher resource when you look at Omai as an underground, or Fennell as an underground opportunity versus an open pit opportunity.
Okay. Which pit will you be more focused on, Wenot or Fennell? I think you kind of touched on that in your presentation. Sounds like Wenot gets the focus first and then move to Fennell after.
Exactly. They're both equally important to us. I got a strategy in my mind of, potentially how to really get this into production if we can demonstrate significant resources at Wenot and Fennell. So I think they're both equally important because, some key learnings from the Aussies, for example, there's no reason why we can't access the ore via ramp if we decide to do both by underground mining, or maybe you mine Wenot because the dike is not there till maybe the 450 meter level. Maybe you can extend that pit down to 300 or 350 meter level. And you can just do the math, right? It was about 1.6 million ounces range mined at Wenot at 1.6 grams. So, if we're lucky enough to extend that to 300 or 350 meters, there likely is quite a bit of gold there. And then maybe you access the other via underground ramp. So I think they're equally important for us, as well as if we can demonstrate new discoveries in and around this area, then, I think we got something special on our hands.
Okay. Do you see any risk to your operations due to COVID with respect to the planned environmental baseline metallurgy and hydrology studies?
So we don't have any impact right now for COVID. Also, we did at the beginning. It took a little bit longer to get the camp set up to allow us to drill. But now I think we got everything under control, and we're moving forward with our drill programs. In terms of metallurgy, this has already been in operation, right? It's a mid-90s type recovery. It's already been proven. You had 3.8 million ounces mined at 1.6 grams. So, you got quite a bit of gold here at great grades. I mean, this is not a speculative, obviously we don't have a resource here, but as you know, anytime you put a resource together, there's always some level of risk because there's a lot of geological interpretation that goes into it to try and estimate what the grade will be. But I think here, because we had quite a bit of gold mine, we got a good feel of what's really here. So I think that's going to give us a lot of knowledge and a leg up when we're coming up with the 43101 reserve, or resource rather, in terms of what we have here. Then in terms of hydrology, one of the issues that IAMGold had, and it was always a question that was presented to me in the very beginning when I got involved with this when I became CEO in October when it was approved by the shareholders. And one of the questions was, I heard that IAMGold had problems drilling Fennell because there was water. And yes, there was water. So, we are in the Caribbean. There's a lot of rainwater. And when they first started drilling, they did experience some water. But then they got under control. It was really the pressure of putting the first hole into this greenstone belt. But when that pressure was relieved, they were able to drill 46 holes. So I'm always perplexed why people ask me, can you drill this thing? When I'll point out, guys, there were 46 holes drilled here below the Fennell Pit. Of course you can drill it. Okay.
When might drilling results be available? And also asking the process for the 43101, I'm assuming is what they mean. And will you need financing for drilling, and when?
Yep. Okay. Good question. So in terms of the first results for drilling, it's hard to say. We're finishing our first hole very shortly, and then you're going to send it in for assays. Assume today it takes 4 weeks to get your assays. So hopefully in the next month, 5 weeks, we'll start getting our first results in. Whether I do 1 hole or 3 holes, I haven't made a decision yet. I'm not usually a fan of, one hole at a time, because I think you got to try and explain the story to the market. But at the same time, I know everyone's chomping at the bit waiting for some results here from fresh drilling, because this is our first drilling program since, as I said, the 2012. So I think people are all, on pins and needles, including myself, waiting for some results. So maybe I'll issue a hole, just, the first hole. And then in terms of money, we are an exploration company. I'm not a revenue generating company. So we're always going to have to go to the market to raise funds. That's the unfortunate part of our industry until we go into production. But where I am fortunate is I have about $3.5 million in cash, which should see us through at least to the end of the second quarter. So, when I decide to raise money, I don't have a specific timeline for it. I do have time. But when I do decide to raise money, I'll make sure that it's in the best interest of the existing shareholders and at the highest possible valuation. That likely means getting some drill holes out before we look to raise money.
Okay. So that you said, Mario, to the second quarter, that would take you through the Wenot drilling completely?
Yes. Oh, for sure. Yeah, we got enough money to complete Wenot. Easy.
Okay. And then you would need to raise to do Fennell and then Broccoli Hill?
Correct. And some other targets in and around the area. Because I like to do the next drill program, a 10,000 meter drill program. And it costs us $250 a meter to drill in this part of Guyana, maybe $300 when you factor in some cost overruns with COVID, makes things a little bit more difficult. So 10,000 meter drill program, 3 million, then G&A and other factors. So, if we can raise 3 to 5 million, I'd be extraordinarily happy. And I think that sets us up for a really aggressive drill program for the second half of the year that we think will generate a lot of value for shareholders because, we'll be able to demonstrate potential at Fennell as well as new targets and obviously at Wenot.
Okay. With respect to raising, just a side question, your key shareholders, do they have rights to participate and maintain their pro rata ownership in the company?
Silvercorp does, and they're currently at 15%. Sandstorm does not. Maybe Sandstorm will participate in the financing, but they're a royalty company and they do have a 2% royalty, which we can buy back half for $4 million. So I'd love to see Sandstorm in there, but I'm not banking on Sandstorm coming in. But I am hopeful that Silvercorp will backstop a financing. Silvercorp, as you know, tried to buy Guyana Goldfields. They saw a lot of value there. The unfortunate part from their perspective is they were outbid by Zijin. But it really, reinforces, I think, for investors, the focus of and the potential in Guyana, not only from North American producers, but also the Chinese. And this is an area I think you're going to see a lot of exploration dollars come into over the next 20 years.
Okay. Any escrow on the RTO shares from the Shell, and what percentage of the outstanding shares would be the original Shell holders? So good question. There is about 80 million shares escrowed. 30 million of that is Sandstorm, and then the rest would be the founders, which are about 45 million of those shares are escrowed. So we got about 200 million shares. So we got about 120 million that are free trading. We've had some good volume, I think. We've had about 30 million shares trading since the IPO, or RTO, I guess, in mid-November. We do have a 3-year escrow on a lot of the founder shares. Okay. Sorry, there's just been some upvoting here, so I just want to make sure I'm not covering a question or missing a question I haven't caught yet. Was there mineralization below Wenot, and will there be further drilling below? Yeah. Oh, look, I might as well answer that one with an image. So this is one of my favorite images, obviously, because anytime you see high-grade gold, you got to pay attention. That was the Wenot. And you can sort of see the pit outline and where the mineralization now is. You can see how shallow the pit was there because it's in the sediments. But you can see the grades that we were encountering below the Wenot pit, and those are the kind of grades you would have gotten in the main part of the pit where it was mined. So basically, we're seeing the mineralization that was mined just continuing to depth. But this is in the sediments, so I think there's real potential now to widen the pit. And I think a lot of exploration here will help demonstrate whether not only can we expand it to depth in the main shear zone, but if it's in the sediments, I think you could really expand the amount of gold at Wenot. But as I said earlier, 9 grams of over 14 meters, and we think there's, maybe that was understated. We don't know because, as I said, there were lots of sections that were missing, and a lot of these holes were quarter core, not a half core. But regardless, you can see in those holes the amount of we're getting some high grade and some good widths, and then in the earlier release as well, you're getting some real wide zones, 20 meters of 3.5 grams and 10 meters of almost 4 grams, and then you're also getting some mineralization in the sediments as well, 8 meters of 1.2. So the first set of results that we had indicated there was potential in the sediments, and we were getting all excited about that, and we were chomping at the bit waiting for the assays for the other holes to come in. And boom, as they started to come in, it purely, proved our thesis that the sediments are definitely mineralized at Wenot. And again, this is a key learning because back then, no one looked in the sediments for mineralization. It was only because Marion and Rosabelle and Suriname, which is the same geological structures, are mainly in the sediments. So we do know in these regions, you're going to get quartz veins in the sediments.
Okay. Next question, is the site secure?
Yes. You know, we're lucky enough that we are in a very, I want to say remote, because we could access it quite simply. It's an hour flight from the Georgetown. We got a landing strip, but the site is very secure. We got no security issues at site. We don't have any community here. That's really important, because I got to tell you, in Colombia, you know, we had a great discovery and a very large project at Alacran. And it's going to be a great project, great NPV. You know, when we looked at it, you know, before I left Cordoba, I think the NPV was $350 million range, and that was with copper at much lower prices and gold at much lower prices. But we do have community issues there that are all being resolved, and extraordinarily confident that that asset will be able to be mined. That's why the Chinese put a significant investment in Cordoba. But not having a major community nearby just makes life significantly easier here. So, you know, I had some great learnings of how to manage communities, and we have great relationships with the community, and Cordoba continues to have great relationship with the community. But there's also a lot more sensitivities you got to be aware of when you got a community nearby. But here, we don't have that issue, which I think makes life significantly easier when exploring and putting this asset in production. Again, obviously, it's been in production, right? So, you know, the communities were very supportive. Mining is very important in Guyana, because oil and gas is going to generate a huge amount of revenue for the country, but it doesn't create a lot of jobs. But mining creates a lot of jobs. And so I think it's a very important industry for Guyana.
Okay. When would you anticipate having a resource? I think, if I remember correctly, it was Q4 this year.
Yeah, by the end of the year, that's our target.
Okay. When will IAMGold start drilling Broccoli Hill?
I would anticipate sometime maybe late Q3, maybe early part of Q4, because, you know, I'm chomping at the bit to test Broccoli Hill. I could tell you, you know, when Sandstorm put some money into Omai, what I understood from their team and their geologists was Broccoli Hill was their #1 target. They saw a lot of potential at Broccoli Hill, and it's obvious to me that there's potential. They also got to put a drill bit in there to see if in a drill hole whether it's ore grade and, you know, whether there's continuity, etc. But having the historical workings at surface, the 500 by 500 meter round area of gold in the soils, the auger drilling, this is a high priority target. When you add in the structural geology and the geophysics, everything's pointing to a target there. So it's one that we really want to get at. We'll start with some trenching to really narrow down where we want to put some first holes. Dennis is great at you know, placing holes and really trying to understand the geology. So I want to give my geologists as much time as possible. I'm a finance guy, so at the end of the day, I want to surround myself with the smartest operators, the smartest geologists, because I think that those are the guys that create the value. It's not me, it's my geological team. And I want to give them every opportunity to really understand this. So when they're ready to put some holes here, we have a discovery.
Yeah. Give them the treasure chest and the tools and
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. My goal is to try and give them all the tools they need, including money at the end of the day. But they're the guys that are going to add the value. You know, it's not the CEO. It's the people on the ground that add all the value.
Okay. Do you have any U.S. analyst coverage?
No, we just launched mid-November. So, you know, we're fairly new. I think over time we'll start getting some coverage. You know, the downside when it comes to coverage is a lot of the banks, et cetera, are really looking for resources. We don't have any as of yet. You know, we can infer some potential resources based on what's been drilled and historically what IAMGold was able to come up with. But I think once we get ourselves to a resource position, or it becomes much clearer that we're getting very close to resource, we'll start to pick up some coverage. You know, I'm hopeful we'll get onto the we'll get onto the Laurentian Bank watch list, which will be really important for us. And they're going to be a key backer. And I think having Laurentian Bank, for example, as a watch list, and I'll be working on other banks to put us on their watch list as well. You know, once we're ready to finance, I'm hoping to have a real strong interest from potential investors here to really move this project forward.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's always a little bit challenging when you're a newer company, right? Yeah.
Takes time. It'll happen
to raise the market awareness. Again, I've said it before. I think genius marketing idea on the not only the stock symbol but the name too. So,
yeah.
Will there be environmental and sustainability considerations during exploration?
Look, 100%. You always got to make sure when you're exploring, you're always thinking about the environment. You're always thinking about the wider community, and you're also, making sure that the locals, the government, everyone understands that you're here to create value for the benefit of everyone. When you're drilling, at the end of the day, it doesn't leave a big environmental footprint. You're putting in 2-inch diameter holes into the ground, and being able to reclaim that is very low cost. But we're thinking longer term here is making sure that the government and the communities has full confidence of us to put this asset eventually back into production. So even the littlest thing like drilling, you need to ensure that you're following all the right environmental standards, and it should be top environmental standards worldwide, because some countries obviously have stronger environmental standards than others. But our geologists have worked worldwide, and we really know to ensure that when we're doing work on the ground, we're doing it at the top standards.
Okay. As you ramp up your drilling program, have you had or do you expect to have any challenges securing drill rigs or crews? Can you remind me what your budgeted all in per meter for drilling costs? I believe it was $250 per meter.
Yep. No, we've got a contractor with a local driller. Believe it or not, there actually is quite a bit of drillers in Guyana because the Guyana Goldfields, Goldex, even some of the big international drillers are in Guyana. So securing drillers is not an issue. It's really just a matter of making sure you got the land to drill something, and I think we do. So, once we're ready to ramp up to 2 or 3 or 4 drills, I don't think that'll be a problem for us to secure the drilling.
Okay. Question here. I have buyers for doré and bullion. Does Omai sell? It's from Faria.
For bullion, well, we're not in operations, so
yeah.
So I'm not sure we can sell bullion at the current moment. But,
I wasn't sure what they meant by their question. But.
Yeah, it sounds like they're looking for bullion or concentrate. But
Faria, maybe you can provide us a follow-up question just to clarify. If we have time, we are getting tight on time here, but I'll move on. Another question from Ryan. Roughly how deep are you planning on drilling at Wenot with the 5,000 meter program? How deep at Fennell with the future drill program? And will there be a lot of drilling that targets below the Omai sill, Fennell deep, or would it be focused more along strike?
Great question. So when it comes to Wenot, they're going to be about 500 meter holes. If you look at the assays we released a couple of weeks ago, we've now extended the mineralization 150 meters below the lowest point of the pit. So we're down to almost 400 meter depth, let's say. And we'll continue to drill at that depth. At some point, we'll drill even deeper because you saw in some of the images, one right on the screen here, these structures are going to continue to go to depth. There's no reason why this is not going to go down to 800, 900, 1,000 meters. So at some point, we're going to continue to drill on strike. When it comes to Fennell, we don't have a drill plan in place as of yet. So I'm not going to jump ahead of where my geologists are thinking to drill at Fennell, but we will drill some deeper holes at Fennell. It's probably going to be 900 meter type holes, 500 meter type holes, 700 meter, depending on which zones you're going to try and target there. If you're looking ahead, once we can demonstrate some resources here, and we're able to demonstrate real potential to have my plan is to try and demonstrate potential for a world-class deposit here. There's no reason why you can't dewater, let's say, Wenot, and do an exploration drift over to Fennell, because they're actually very close. And then you can maybe drill Fennell from underground, which would then really reduce your exploration costs to a fraction of what they would be from surface. Also, you're going to have to spend money on the exploration drift, but that's just an upfront investment. But going forward, your exploration costs would be much lower. 250
meters roughly between them, Mario?
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember I was trying to figure it out from the map. Okay. Another question here. I'll try and get to the last two. When would you start drilling in both pits? What are we doing with the water in the pits?
So right now, we started drilling Wenot, as I mentioned. Fennell will be sometime maybe Q3 after we finish the Wenot drill program. The water in the pits are going to stay for now. There's no need for us to deal with them because we can drill without dewatering those pits. The dewatering decision will come down to whether this is going to be an underground or open pit mining operation. Wenot, I think, has potential to be both open pit and underground because there is no sill, at least till we think maybe the 450 meter level, maybe 500 meters. And or, as I just mentioned, maybe make a decision with some, surface drilling at Fennell. If we continue to hit those super high grade hits and wide zones at Fennell, I think it's justifiable to dewater one of the pits, and likely it would be Wenot, so that we can mine both from and drill both from underground.
Okay. Question here on the stock price. Do you know what, or any reason for the pressure on the stock price? Gold price or length to resource? Interestingly enough, while you've been talking, it was down and it's recovered. I don't know if people are listening to this and buying or not.
Well, look, I think being a news story out there with so many great stories out there, and silver being hot at the time when we started listing, I think just people didn't pay attention. My kind of style at the end of the day is to deliver results. I don't stress when the price is up or down a few pennies here or there, because I know once the results start coming out, the value for the asset will show itself. But doesn't mean I shouldn't be out there marketing as we're doing today. And the story is starting to be understood. I'm getting emails and calls a lot more from people, and seeing the share price at 16, 17, 18 cents, they're saying, oh man, this is a great entry point here, which it is, because, anyone here on this call could just do the math. I mean, IAMGold identify 1.5 to 2.5 million ounces below Fennell and it's open. You had 1.6 million, 1.7 million ounces mined at Wenot, and you can see on the image here, right? Mineralization is down to 450 meter level, or 400, or about 150 meters below the bottom of the pit. And it's down to almost 400 meter level. And whether you got a pit down to 300 meters, I have no idea until we get more drilling here, but you can do the math. You can see very quickly there's potential here to add some sizable resources. It's just a matter of time. And I think that's actually the biggest issue I'm facing, is we don't have resources, right? So demonstrating to the market that this is not only a brownfield site that was shut down, but proving to the market that a lot of gold was left behind, that's always a struggle. But once results start coming out and the drill holes start coming out below Wenot, the market's going to pay attention fairly quickly.
Okay. That ends the questions. I'll ask a real quick one here, Mario, because we do have to go, but I didn't think I caught it during your presentation. Are you looking to delineate this deposit and bring it into production yourself? Or are you looking to, wrap it up nicely with a bow and sell it to someone for the right price? What's the end game here?
The end game is always to create shareholder value, and whether that means selling it or putting it into production. You always got to make that decision at any point in time. But I've put assets in production. I was CFO of something. We went from exploration to commercial production. I was CFO of Ivernia in Australia. Our mine there went from exploration to commercial production. I am fully prepared to put an asset in production. I've got no fears of doing that. And I think any company that's not prepared to do that, I'm not sure you really believe in your asset. And I think this is one that could go in production. I know there's a mill nearby. So I'm always thinking ahead of various scenarios. People that know me well, I always got plan A, B, C, and D in my mind. Of things never go to plan, right? So you got to be flexible enough to move to a different scenario. Because look, I think gold's going much higher, but I can't tell you with certainty 100% that gold's going to be at $2,000 an ounce or $2,500 an ounce at this point next year. So I got to be prepared for every scenario. But the most important part is I'm always prepared to put an asset in production if I think the asset is worthy of going into production. And we haven't gotten to that decision point yet, but everything I can see on paper here is this one's got a chance to go into production.
Okay. Well, we'll have to cut it off there. We only have a few minutes till our next presentation, but Mario, very interesting company. Thank you a lot for joining us today and sharing the story. If you have any follow-up questions for Mario, again, when this webinar ends, there will be a survey. If you answer yes to the question, I'd like management to contact me. We'll be providing your contact information
Great.
to Mario, and he will arrange to have a follow-up discussion with you. So Mario, thanks again. Good luck with the project. I'll certainly be watching the news releases. And until then, you stay safe. Enjoy California.
You too. And if anyone, always feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, call me. All the information's on the website, LinkedIn, whatever. I'm always available. Happy to talk.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.